"Sir, the cat in your basement is alive," the little girl told the firefighter. What followed broke him. Firefighter Joe Altum's life shattered on a cold March night when flames consumed the Riverside apartments, taking with them 15 families, 3 colleagues, and something he couldn't name until it was gone. The official report called it an electrical fire. The insurance adjusters called it negligence. Joe called it the night he stopped sleeping properly. What broke him wasn't the fire itself. Joe had run into burning buildings for 12 years. He'd pulled children from smoke-filled rooms, carried unconscious elderly residents down 7 flights of stairs, held pressure on wounds while waiting for paramedics. Fire was his job. Death was a possibility he'd accepted the day he took the oath. What broke him was the basement. Joe had been first through the front entrance that night, his team right behind him. Standard protocol. Check every floor, every apartment, mark the doors, move fast but move smart. They'd cleared the first 2 floors when dispatch radioed in new information. A caller reported hearing sounds from the basement. Possibly a child. Joe had gone down alone. The stairs were narrow, the smoke thicker than it should have been. His flashlight cut through the darkness in weak arcs, catching glimpses of storage cages and forgotten furniture. The heat pressed against his gear like a living thing. Then he heard it. A soft cry, high-pitched, barely audible over the roar of flames above. Joe moved toward it, shouting reassurance into the smoke. He kicked open a storage door, expecting to find a child trapped inside. Instead, he found Carol Nill. She was 8 years old, small for her age, clutching a gray tabby cat against her chest. Her face was streaked with tears and soot. The cat was limp, eyes closed, not moving. Dead, Joe thought immediately. The girl's apartment was on the 4th floor. She'd run down to save her cat and gotten trapped when the stairwell filled with smoke. Joe grabbed her, pulled her up, and ran. He didn't stop to check the cat. There wasn't time. The building was coming down around them. He carried Carol out, handed her to paramedics, and went back in to finish the sweep. 20 minutes later, the west wall collapsed. 3 of Joe's crew were inside. 2 made it out. 1 didn't. The department gave Joe a commendation for saving Carol. The newspapers called him a hero. Carol's mother, Diane Nill, thanked him with tears in her eyes at the hospital. But Carol herself wouldn't speak. She sat in the pediatric ward, silent and hollow, staring at nothing. The cat, Pepper, had died in the fire. The veterinarian confirmed it days later when Carol's mother brought the body in, hoping for a miracle that didn't come. Smoke inhalation. Too much damage. The child had held a dying animal while flames consumed her home. Joe attended the funeral for his fallen colleague. He accepted the award. He went back to work. But something inside him had cracked, and he couldn't find the edges to piece it back together. 6 months passed. Joe stopped answering calls from his ex-wife. Stopped going to the firefighters' gym. Started drinking alone in his apartment, staring at the commendation on his wall and wondering what kind of hero saves a child but loses a colleague. Carol's mother sent him letters. Thanking him again. Telling him Carol was in therapy. Explaining that the girl still hadn't spoken since the fire. Joe read every letter once and filed them away in a drawer he never opened. The betrayal came quietly, the way most betrayals do. It started with rumors. Whispers in the station that the Riverside fire hadn't been accidental. That the building's owner, Richard Crane, had known about faulty wiring for years. That tenants had complained. That inspections had been falsified. Joe didn't pay attention at first. Fires had causes. Investigations happened. Justice or insurance payouts followed. His job was to fight the fire, not dissect it afterward. Then he received a call from Carol's mother. Her voice was shaking. She'd found something. Could Joe meet her? It was about the fire. About what really happened that night. Joe almost said no. He'd been avoiding anything connected to Riverside. But something in Diane's voice pulled at him. Desperation mixed with anger. The kind of combination that meant someone had lied. They met at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the station. Diane slid a folder across the table. Inside were photocopies of maintenance requests, complaint letters, inspection reports. All of them ignored. All of them signed off by the city's fire marshal, a man named Thomas Vance. Vance had been Joe's direct supervisor for 5 years. The inspection report dated 3 weeks before the fire showed a complete safety clearance. No violations. No hazards. Nothing to suggest Riverside was a death trap waiting to ignite. But the tenant's letters told a different story. Electrical outlets sparking. Breakers failing. Smoke detectors that hadn't worked in months. Complaints filed, recorded, and buried. Richard Crane had paid Vance to sign off on false reports. The fire marshal had taken the money, stamped the papers, and walked away. When the building burned, 15 families lost their homes. 1 firefighter lost his life. And Carol lost her voice along with her cat. Joe stared at the documents for a long time. Then he looked at Diane. "What do you want me to do with this?" he asked quietly. Diane's eyes were red but dry. "I want you to help me prove it," she said. "I want them to pay." Joe nodded slowly. The crack inside him shifted. Not healing. Not yet. But aligning into something sharper. Something with edges. "Okay," he said. "Then we make them pay." What Joe didn't know yet was that Carol had been trying to tell him something since the night of the fire. Something about the basement. Something about Pepper. Something that would unravel everything he thought he understood about that night. The truth wasn't buried in paperwork. It was waiting in the ruins of Riverside, in a storage cage in the basement, in the memory of a little girl who'd stopped speaking because the words were too terrible to say out loud. And it would take one small voice, finally breaking through the silence, to bring it all crashing down. The call came at 2:47 in the morning. Joe Altum woke to his phone vibrating against the nightstand, the screen too bright in the darkness. He answered without looking at the number. His voice came out rough and used. "Yeah. Joe, it's Diane. Diane Nill." He sat up, already reaching for the lamp. The room came into focus slowly. Empty beer bottles on the dresser. His uniform hanging over a chair. He's been awake until an hour ago, reading through the Riverside files for the 100th time. "What's wrong?" he asked. Diane's voice shook. Carol spoke. Joe's hand stopped halfway to the light switch. "What?" "She spoke," Diane repeated. "Just now." She woke up screaming. She kept saying the same thing over and over. "She says the cat is alive. She says Pepper is alive in the basement." Joe exhaled slowly. "Diane," he started, but she cut him off. "I know how it sounds," she said. "I know. But she won't stop. She's hysterical. She says she heard him. Tonight. She says he's been there the whole time." Joe closed his eyes. Grief did strange things to children. Trauma twisted memory into shapes that felt real even when they weren't. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I know this is hard." "Please," Diane said. "Just come. Just talk to her. You're the only one she trusts." The words landed heavier than they should have. Joe didn't feel trustworthy. Didn't feel like someone a traumatized child should rely on. But he was already standing, already pulling on yesterday's jeans. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. First, welcoming CTA, before we go further into this unbelievable night, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and leave a like. Your support truly means the world to us. Thank you." The Nil apartment was small, temporary housing provided by the city after Riverside burned. Joe knocked twice and Diane opened the door immediately, as if she'd been standing on the other side waiting. Her hair was pulled back, her face pale and tight. "Carol's in her room," she said. Joe stepped inside. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender and old coffee. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator, none of them finished. He followed Diane down a narrow hallway to a bedroom door left slightly open. Inside, Carol sat on her bed, knees pulled to her chest, eyes fixed on the wall. She was 9 now, a year older but somehow smaller than Joe remembered. Her silence had become part of her, something she wore like armor. "Hey Carol," Joe said softly. He sat on the floor near the door, giving her space. "Your mom says you remembered something." Carol didn't look at him. Her voice, when it came, was so quiet Joe almost missed it. "He's alive." Joe glanced at Diane. She nodded, eyes glistening. "Who's alive?" Joe asked gently. "Pepper." Carol's hands clenched around her knees. "I heard him. Tonight. In the basement. Where we were." Joe felt his chest tighten. "Carol," he said carefully, "Pepper didn't make it. I'm so sorry. I know that's hard to hear. You didn't check." Carol's voice cracked. "You grabbed me and ran. You didn't check if he was breathing." The accusation hung in the air, small and devastating. Joe opened his mouth, then closed it. She was right. He hadn't checked. There hadn't been time. But that didn't stop the guilt from sinking its teeth in now. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have." Carol finally looked at him. Her eyes were dry but fierce. "He wasn't dead," she said. "He was scared. You left him there. Then everything collapsed. But he didn't die. He's still there. He's been waiting." Joe didn't argue. Didn't try to explain the impossibility. He just asked, "Why do you think you heard him tonight?" "Because I did," Carol said simply. "In my dream." But it wasn't a dream. It was real. He was crying. Like he used to when I was late coming home. Joe looked at Diane. She wiped her eyes quickly, shaking her head. "We've tried therapy," she whispered. "They say it's trauma. Magical thinking. A way for her to process the loss. But she won't let it go." Joe turned back to Carol. "What do you want me to do?" Carol's voice steadied. "Go back. Go to the basement. Find him." Joe nodded slowly. "Okay. I'll go look." "But Carol, if he's not there," "He is," Carol interrupted. "And he's scared. Please." Joe stood, knees aching from sitting on the floor. "I'll check it out first thing in the morning." "Now," Carol said. "He's there now. He needs help now." Joe met Diane's eyes. She looked exhausted, desperate, caught between hope and heartbreak. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Would it hurt? To just go? Maybe if she sees the basement empty, she can finally let go." Joe wasn't sure that's how trauma worked. But he nodded. "I'll go tonight." Relief and fear crossed Diane's face in equal measure. "Thank you," she breathed. Joe looked back at Carol. She was watching him now, something fierce and unbreakable in her expression. "Bring him home," she said. Joe didn't promise. Promises felt dangerous. But he said, "I'll look." And he meant it. The drive to Riverside took 15 minutes. Joe parked 2 blocks away, the street empty except for a few scattered cars and the distant hum of the interstate. The building stood like a skeleton against the night sky, windows boarded, walls blackened, yellow caution tape fluttering weakly in the wind. Joe grabbed his flashlight from the trunk and approached the entrance. The front doors had been chained shut months ago, but the side access near the loading dock was still open, used by inspectors and salvage crews when they bothered to show up. He slipped through, stepping over debris and shattered glass. The air inside was wrong. Stale and cold, thick with the memory of smoke and something else. Decay, maybe. Or just emptiness. Joe clicked on his flashlight and moved through the lobby. His boots crunched on broken tile. Graffiti covered the walls, messages left by teenagers or vandals or people with nowhere else to mark time. The stairwell to the basement was exactly where he remembered. The door hung crooked on its hinges, warped by heat. Joe pushed it open and descended slowly, each step creaking under his weight. The temperature dropped as he went lower. His breath misted in the beam of his flashlight. The basement smelled like wet concrete and rust. Joe swept the light across rows of storage cages, some intact, most collapsed or torn apart by fire and salvage crews. He moved carefully, avoiding exposed wiring and unstable debris. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to himself. "There's nothing here." Then he heard it. A sound. Soft. Distant. Almost too faint to be real. Joe stopped. His pulse kicked up. He aimed the flashlight toward the far corner, where Carol's storage unit had been. The cage door was twisted but still partially standing. The lock had melted away. Joe crossed the space slowly. "Hello," he called, his voice swallowed by the dark. Nothing. He reached the cage and pulled the door open with a metallic scrape. Inside was wreckage. Boxes. Burned furniture. A child's bicycle frame. And in the back corner, half hidden beneath a collapsed shelf, something moved. Joe's breath caught. He stepped inside, crouching low, and shone the light directly at the movement. 2 eyes reflected back at him, green and bright and terrified. The cat was impossibly thin, fur matted and filthy, but alive. Breathing. Watching. Joe froze. His mind scrambled to process what he was seeing. The animal should be dead. Had to be dead. But there it sat, pressed against the wall, shaking. "Pepper," Joe whispered. The cat flinched at the name. Joe set the flashlight down carefully, keeping the beam angled away. He moved slowly, hands out, non-threatening. "Easy," he murmured. "I'm not going to hurt you." The cat hissed weakly, then whimpered, the sound small and broken. Joe saw the injuries now. Burns along the back legs. A gash above one eye, poorly healed. The animal had survived, but barely. And it had been here, trapped in the ruins, for 6 months. Joe felt something crack open inside him, wider this time. He reached out slowly. The cat didn't run. Didn't fight. It just watched, too weak to do much else. Joe's fingers brushed against matted fur. The cat flinched but didn't pull away. "I'm sorry," Joe said, the words catching in his throat. "I'm so sorry I left you." He pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around the cat carefully, lifting the fragile body against his chest. The animal was light, too light, bones sharp beneath the fur. But the heartbeat was there, steady and stubborn. Joe stood, holding the cat close, and turned back toward the stairs. His flashlight beam cut through the dark, illuminating the path he'd come from. But as he reached the doorway, he noticed something else. Scratches. Fresh scratches on the walls near the floor, leading toward a second storage room he hadn't checked yet. Joe stopped. The cat stirred weakly in his arms. He looked down at it, then back at the scratches. Someone else had been down here recently. Joe adjusted his grip on the cat and moved toward the second room. The door was ajar. He nudged it open with his foot. Inside, stacked against the far wall, were boxes. Dozens of them. Sealed and labeled. Joe aimed his flashlight at the nearest label and felt ice slide down his spine. Riverside Apartments. Fire Marshal Records. Property of Thomas Vance. Joe's jaw clenched. He set the cat down gently on a clear patch of floor and crossed to the boxes. He pulled one open. Inside were files. Inspection reports. Maintenance logs. Payment receipts. All of them falsified. All of them signed by Vance. And beneath those, photographs. Images of the building before the fire. Electrical panels with exposed wiring. Smoke detectors removed entirely. Evidence that should have been in the official investigation. Evidence that had been hidden instead. Joe pulled out his phone and took photos of everything, hands shaking slightly. This wasn't just corruption. This was conspiracy. Vance had buried the proof, stored it here in the ruins where no one would think to look. And he'd kept it, maybe as insurance, maybe as leverage. Either way, it was a confession written in paperwork and lies. The cat meowed softly behind him. Joe turned, shoving the files back into the box. "We're leaving," he said. "Right now." He scooped up the cat again and moved fast, back through the basement, up the stairs, out into the cold night air. His truck was still parked where he'd left it. He set the cat on the passenger seat, engine already running, heat blasting. The animal curled into a tight ball, shivering. Joe pulled out his phone and called Diane. She answered on the first ring. "Did you find anything?" Joe's voice was steady despite the adrenaline. "I found Pepper. And I found proof." Diane sucked in a breath. "You're serious?" "He's alive." "Barely," Joe said. "I'm taking him to the emergency vet on 5th. Meet me there." "But Diane, this is bigger than the cat. There's evidence in that basement. Evidence that proves Vance buried the inspection reports. We have him." Silence. Then Diane's voice, shaking with something between fury and relief. "Bring Pepper to Carol first. Please. She needs to see him. She needs to know she was right." Joe hesitated. The cat needed medical attention immediately. But he understood. Carol had spent 6 months believing something no one else believed. She deserved to see the proof before anyone else. "Okay," he said. "I'm coming to you first." The drive back took 10 minutes. Joe carried the cat up to the Nil apartment, Diane opening the door before he could knock. Her hand flew to her mouth when she saw the bundle in his arms. "Oh my God." Carol appeared in the hallway, eyes wide. "Pepper," she whispered. Joe knelt down, unwrapping his jacket slowly. The cat lifted its head weakly, ears twitching at the sound of Carol's voice. The girl dropped to her knees, tears streaming silently down her face. She reached out, fingers trembling, and touched the cat's head. Pepper's eyes closed. A soft, broken purr vibrated through his thin body. "You were right," Joe said quietly. "He was there. Waiting for you." Carol didn't speak. She just cried, holding her hand against the cat's side, feeling the heartbeat she believed in when no one else would. Diane wrapped her arms around her daughter, both of them shaking with relief. Joe stood slowly, giving them space. "We need to get him to a vet," he said gently. "Now." Diane nodded, wiping her eyes. "I'll drive. You lead." They moved quickly, Carol cradling Pepper in the back seat, Joe following in his truck. The emergency veterinary clinic was bright and sterile and blessedly open. The staff took Pepper immediately, asking questions Joe answered as best he could. Smoke inhalation. Malnutrition. Burns. Possible infections. They disappeared into the back with the cat, leaving Joe, Diane, and Carol in the waiting room. Carol sat between them, silent again, but different now. Not hollow. Just waiting. Joe pulled out his phone and scrolled through the photos he'd taken in the basement. Diane leaned over. "What is that?" "Evidence," Joe said quietly. "Everything we need to prove Vance falsified the reports. And proof that Richard Crane paid him to do it." Diane's eyes hardened. "What do we do?" "We take it to someone who can't be bought," Joe said. "Internal affairs. Maybe the state fire marshal. Someone outside Vance's reach. And we do it fast, before he realizes I was in that basement tonight." Diane nodded. Her hand found Carol's. The girl squeezed back. A vet technician emerged from the back room. She smiled, tired but genuine. "He's stable," she said. "Malnourished and dehydrated, but no critical injuries. We're keeping him overnight for observation and fluids. He's a fighter." Carol's shoulders sagged with relief. "Can I see him?" "Not tonight, sweetie," the technician said gently. "He needs rest. But you can visit tomorrow. Promise?" "Promise." Carol nodded slowly. Joe stood. "I need to make some calls. Diane, take Carol home. Get some sleep. I'll handle the rest." Diane met his eyes. "Thank you," she said, and this time the words carried weight beyond gratitude. They carried partnership. Alliance. A shared understanding that this wasn't over. Not yet. Joe drove back to his apartment as dawn broke over the city, the sky shifting from black to gray to pale orange. He made coffee, strong and bitter, and opened his laptop. The files were already uploading to a secure cloud storage. Backup. Just in case. Then he called the state fire marshal's office. Left a message. Brief. Professional. New evidence regarding the Riverside fire. Request immediate meeting. Next, he called his union rep, covered his bases. Made sure someone knew what he was doing in case things went wrong. By the time the sun was fully up, Joe had set everything in motion. He sat back in his chair, exhausted but steady. For the first time in 6 months, the crack inside him felt less like damage and more like a split that let the light in. His phone buzzed. A text from Diane. "Carol's sleeping. Pepper's stats are good. Thank you." Joe replied simply. "We're not done yet." He meant it as a warning and a promise. Vance and Crane thought they'd buried the truth in paperwork and rubble. But the truth had teeth now. And it was coming for them. The meeting with the state fire marshal happened 48 hours later. Joe arrived early, the files printed and organized in a folder that felt heavier than it should. The marshal, a woman named Patricia Oakes, listened without interrupting. Her expression was unreadable, professional, cold in the way people get when they're processing something that could ruin careers. When Joe finished, she leaned back. "This is explosive," she said. If it's real. Joe slid the printed photographs across the table. It's real. Check the metadata. Cross-reference the dates. I'll take a polygraph if you want. Oak studied him. You understand what this means? If Vance buried this evidence, he's criminally liable. If Crane paid him, they both are. And if you're wrong, I'm not wrong, Joe said. Oakes nodded slowly. I'll open an investigation. Quietly. If this leaks before we have everything locked down, they'll destroy what's left and disappear. Joe stood. How long? Weeks, maybe. We'll need warrants. Interviews. The basement will have to be secured and re-examined. Joe clenched his jaw. That's too long. Oakes met his eyes. It's how long it takes to do this right. Go home, Altum. Let us handle it. Joe wanted to argue. Wanted to push. But he nodded. Just do it fast. People died because of them. Oak's expression softened slightly. I know. We won't let them walk. Joe left the building and drove straight to the veterinary clinic. Carol and Diane were already there, sitting in the lobby. Carol looked up when he entered, her face brighter than he'd seen in a year. He's awake, she said. They're letting me take him home today. Joe smiled despite everything. That's good news. Can I see him? The vet led them back. Pepper sat in a recovery kennel, still thin but alert. His eyes tracked movement. His ears swiveled toward Carol's voice. The girl knelt by the kennel door, fingers pressed against the mesh. Hi baby, she whispered. I'm here. I didn't forget you. The cat meowed, small but insistent. Carol laughed, a sound Joe hadn't heard from her before. The vet cleared her throat. He'll need medication. Special diet. Follow-up appointments. But he's going to be okay. Diane's eyes filled. Thank you. Thank you so much. They signed the discharge papers. Carol carried Pepper out in a new carrier, holding it carefully against her chest. Joe walked them to the parking lot. The sun was bright, the air crisp. Normal. As if the world hadn't just shifted on its axis. Diane turned to him before getting in the car. What happens now? Joe told her about the investigation. About Oakes. About the warrants and the waiting. Diane listened, then nodded. We'll wait. But we're not staying quiet. She pulled out her phone. I've been contacted by a journalist. Someone who's been investigating building safety violations. I'm going to talk to them. Joe started to protest, then stopped. Diane was right. Silence had protected Vance and Crane long enough. Okay, he said. But be careful. Diane smiled, sharp and determined. We will. They drove away. Joe stood in the parking lot, hands in his pockets, watching until the car disappeared. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Back off, Altum. You don't know what you're playing with. Joe stared at the message. Then he deleted it. He knew exactly what he was playing with. The question wasn't whether he'd back off. The question was how far they'd go to stop him. And whether he'd be ready when they tried. Thank you for watching, kindly like, follow and stay tuned for more beautiful story.